The ceasefire in the Iran war now seems to be at a stalemate. However, at the same time, a major figure behind Iran in this war has emerged. Who exactly is it? And what are the factors behind the realization of this ceasefire? Things could still heat up going forward, but this is closely related to that major figure. This is the first topic I, Fang Wei, bring to you today. The second topic is that US Vice President Vance went to Budapest, Hungary, to campaign for Prime Minister Orban. At the same time, Trump also posted on social media this morning to support him. Wow, the US president campaigning for the Prime Minister of another country. How should we view this? I'll talk more about this today. In addition, perhaps the biggest news for Chinese people today is this. Especially for our friends in Taiwan, the biggest news is that today, the KMT chairwoman, Zheng met with Xi Jinping at the Great Hall of the People, and it turned into a major incident. Zheng was stopped halfway through her remarks. She wasn't allowed to continue speaking to the media. So what exactly happened? Today, we'll provide an analysis for everyone. People are speculating about the real reason behind this, but here's what I want to share with you. I believe this is the real reason. All right, welcome to the program brought to you by Fang Wei. Good morning, America. Hello to all our viewers on YouTube and listeners of Sound of Hope, Silicon Valley FM 96.1. All right, let's get straight to the point now. Although President Trump has stated that the ceasefire agreement and the ceasefire with Iran depend on Iran's full agreement to immediately and safely open the Strait of Hormuz, in reality, the strait is currently completely under the control of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Because people are worried about naval mines in the strait and the possibility of encountering attacks from Iranian drones or missiles halfway through, no one dares to cross right now. Currently, there are about 3,200 ships, including 800 cruise ships and cargo vessels, lined up on the western side of the strait waiting to pass. In total, there are 20,000 crew members stranded in the Persian Gulf. As everyone knows, each of these large cruise ships is worth over $1 billion. So if they get hit, the losses would be enormous. That's why the owners of these cruise ships don't dare let their vessels move forward. As a result, on Thursday, only 3 ships passed through the Strait of Hormuz. 2 of them were Iranian ships, and the other was a bulk carrier. This is basically a situation where bandits are in charge. At the same time, Iran is charging fees to any ships passing through, though of course they don't charge their own Iranian ships. According to the Financial Times, Iran, the fee they charge is $1 per barrel of oil as a passage toll. And then, the payment has to be made in cryptocurrency. They don't use US dollars. They're very angry at the United States, so they refuse to use dollars. In Tehran, Iran, they've even put up anti-American propaganda billboards. On them it says, the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed. The entire Islamic world is our hunting ground. I misspoke. The entire Persian Gulf is our hunting ground. That's how aggressive they are. This refers to Iran's missiles and drones. They recklessly attack all over the Persian Gulf, indiscriminately hitting third-party civilian facilities that have nothing to do with them. So this is the current situation, right? So how did President Trump respond? Last night, President Trump tweeted, saying that there are reports Iran is trying to charge fees on oil tankers passing through the Strait of Hormuz. They'd better not do that. If they are doing it, they'd better stop now. In addition, the Wall Street Journal published an article saying that Trump announced a ceasefire too early, that the timing for a ceasefire was not yet right. Trump then tweeted saying, because Iran will never have nuclear weapons. And very soon, you will see oil start to flow, whether or not Iran helps. For me, it doesn't matter either way. So what does this mean? Obviously, Trump still has cards up his sleeve. In addition, this morning, Trump tweeted again saying that Iran has done a terrible job allowing oil to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Some people would say this is disgraceful, that this is not the agreement we reached. All right, having said that, it's obviously a stalemate, isn't it? So right now, are the negotiations ongoing? Well, that's a big question mark. As for the ongoing talks, what is expected is this. On Saturday, which is tomorrow, in Islamabad, Pakistan, the negotiations are still set to take place with Iran's foreign minister and the US vice president. Vance will meet there. There are even rumors circulating about concerns for Vance's safety because Iran is now seeking to retaliate against the United States, and any opportunity to harm high-ranking US officials would be seized. So, is Islamabad in Pakistan considered a safe place? So there are a lot of doubts and uncertainties being raised about this. At the same time, while President Trump is strongly pushing for de-escalation of the conflict, there are reports that the Chinese Communist Party played a key behind-the-scenes role in the ceasefire negotiations brokered in Pakistan, persuading Tehran to accept the ceasefire. This suggests that Beijing may have shifted from a long-term policy of non-involvement to a more active diplomatic mediation, according to a report by Bloomberg News as President Trump was approaching the deadline he set, which was Tuesday. As the situation developed toward Tuesday the 13th at 8 o'clock, when Trump vowed to bring an end to Iran's entire civilization, it gradually became clear that there was indeed one country with enough influence to persuade Iran to de-escalate, and that country is America's biggest competitor. the Chinese Communist Party. So when he said this, it was probably 3 days after I had already been saying it. I kept telling everyone that the CCP was intervening, that the CCP was pressuring Iran to back down. And the reason the CCP is forcing Iran to back down is because the CCP itself is now suffering heavy blows. Okay, so Iranian officials have also stated, according to some reports, that it was the CCP's push at the last moment that led Iran to agree to a ceasefire. And this claim was then indirectly confirmed by Trump. And then, as for a third party, who in Pakistan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Shahbaz Sharif, publicly thanked the CCP for its support. Meanwhile, the White House stated that Beijing's role in this ceasefire, in facilitating the ceasefire, was at the highest level between the US and Chinese governments. All right, so what is the reason? Let's talk about the reason. Well, the reason is, I've actually already mentioned this to everyone before, but I'll say it again, since all of this happened just 2 days ago. The fact that such a small country like Pakistan was able to mediate between the US and Iran and get Iran to agree can only mean one thing, that the CCP is acting behind Pakistan. And the reason is because the blockade of the strait, when Iran blocks the strait, it brings high oil prices not only to the CCP, but to the whole world. This has caused the Chinese economy to face tremendous pressure, okay? And then there is a senior fellow specializing in China studies at the US-China Foreign Relations Council named Liu Zongyuan. He said that the data to be released next week is expected to show that after the outbreak of conflict triggered by the US and Israel, China's industrial output and exports have already slowed down that month. He said that the reason the Chinese Communist Party is taking action is because the Iran war directly threatens the conditions on which its economic growth and domestic political stability depend. Okay, and if Trump publicly praises the CCP because of this matter, that would be exactly the kind of political capital Xi Jinping hopes to accumulate before the rescheduled summit. Okay. So it's possible that because of the role the CCP played in the ceasefire, Trump might end up owing Beijing a favor in terms of diplomacy when they meet in mid-May. Okay, well then, how will Trump view this? That's something I'll discuss with you all a bit later. What should we call this? Not a conclusion, not a discovery, but rather, how will Trump see this situation? All right, so that's the current state of affairs. Meanwhile, another piece of news is that the commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Ahmad Vahidi, is taking action. This information comes from a major account on X, and this S account is actually quite reliable. According to his report, he says that the commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps intends to marginalize Ghalibaf, who is the speaker, and Foreign Minister Araghchi. So what this means is that the people who truly hold real power in Iran are those who control the military. It's not those officials who went to Islamabad for negotiations, but rather the Revolutionary Guard. So these are all variables. So everyone is watching several aspects that are changing on Trump's side, on the Iranian government side, on the Iranian Revolutionary Guard side, and on the Chinese Communist Party's side. All four parties are shifting like tectonic plates. So what is really going on? Of course, Trump's control over the situation is the most important, right? How does Trump handle this matter? That will be the next piece of news, which I will analyze for everyone in depth. Next, let me talk about this next news item, which is about Trump. Trump retweeted and revealed the truth. He revealed Trump's real thoughts about the Chinese Communist Party. What's going on here? Okay, let's talk about this first. Regarding the role that Beijing is playing, will Trump feel grateful? How will Trump view this matter? Before talking about this, let me mention two other things first. No, I'll talk about those two things in a moment. Let's talk about this first. In mid-May, Trump is going to visit China, right? What is his real attitude toward the Chinese Communist Party? Is Xi Jinping really, as Trump has repeatedly said, his good friend? Actually, everyone has their doubts about this, right? Of course, I've always shared my own views with you all, but whether you believe it or not is up to each person to judge for themselves. However, I'll continue discussing this topic. Since Trump took office first, he drove Li Ka-shing's company and the Chinese Communist Party's influence out of the Panama Canal. Second, he demanded that Greenland be handed over to the United States for administration. And the latest news is... So Europe, Denmark has agreed to allow the US military to increase its deployments at multiple locations in Greenland, planning to add several new military bases. Third, the United States launched a raid on Venezuela and captured Maduro. Fourth, it initiated what is called a siege against Cuba. Fifth, it struck Iran. All of these actions, wherever the military points its spear, seem to be aimed at the Chinese Communist Party. Everyone is speculating whether Trump is playing a grand game of chess, but each move seems to be independent. Trump never mentions the Chinese Communist Party in any of these actions, right? Except for Greenland. When it comes to Greenland, he mentions the CCP, but he also adds Russia, so it doesn't seem particularly targeted. Each matter seems to have its own reason. And everyone keeps saying that Xi Jinping is his good friend, so people are all guessing, but no one can figure it out. Then when he plans to visit China, many friends in Taiwan are concerned. What exactly are you going to do during your visit to China? Are you going to delay arms sales, postpone arms sales, or are you going to sell out Taiwan? There really is this concern. So today, maybe, just maybe, we have an answer. Why? Because an inadvertent retweet by Trump might have revealed his true thoughts. What happened? Trump, just today, retweeted an article. Did everyone see it? This article was retweeted by Trump. The title of this article is Trump upends China's lucrative sanctioned oil import scheme after Iran. Let's show everyone again. This is from Just the News, which is a conservative news website. What does it mean for an online media outlet to repost this article? By reposting it, it obviously means that Trump first read it and second recommends everyone take a look. That's what it means, right? So what exactly do these articles say? Let me tell you the general idea of this article. Listen to me. Since Trump read it and shared it with everyone, that means he agrees with its content, right? So what does the article talk about? Here's what it says. For years, the Chinese Communist Party has been exploiting loopholes in US sanctions to import oil at steeply discounted prices from rogue states like Iran, Venezuela, and Russia. This serves two purposes. First, to undermine the sanctions imposed by the US and the West on these three countries, and second, to provide itself with a lifeline and increase its own wealth. But now, President Trump's actions against Venezuela and Iran have completely upended the CCP's arrangements, upended their arrangement. Before the important meeting between the leaders of China and the United States, which is scheduled to take place in Beijing next month, a researcher named Sadler from the Allison Center for International Security at the Heritage Foundation in the US. Sadler was interviewed by Justin News, so this article is basically based on his views. In other words, Trump agrees with his perspective. What did he say? Listen to me. He said, I believe that at the core of everything Trump is doing is a grand strategy aimed at the Chinese Communist Party. What is he referring to? Specifically the Iran war and the US strike operations against Venezuela. He said that before the US took action against Venezuela last Christmas, China had always been a major beneficiary of cheap oil and could even take the lead itself. What does terms of oil purchase mean? It refers to the price at which oil is bought. So the international community has actually been sanctioning Iran, Venezuela, and Russia all along, right? So what does China do? What do these countries do? They use shadow teams. What are shadow teams? It means doing things secretly, under the table. Basically, it means violating sanctions, to put it plainly. When ships are sailing on the high seas, they have to constantly announce who they are as they go. I am so-and-so, I belong to so-and-so. But some shadow fleets stay silent, sneaking around in secret. This threatens maritime safety, particularly in narrow straits where collisions occur. With ships moving 24/7, identification is vital at night. Normally, when a ship is approaching, it will keep broadcasting, I am so-and-so, I am so-and-so, this is my ship, this is my route, so that you can avoid collisions, right? These are actually just the basic rules of normal international order. But the shadow fleets sail with their lights off, completely in the dark, and they're usually old ships as well. These are not legitimate operations. Legitimate ones don't make this kind of money. So a large number of shadow fleets secretly transport oil from these three countries to the Chinese Communist Party, which is the buyer. Russia itself also operates a huge shadow fleet, and the CCP directly runs its own shadow fleet as well, called Protein. This fleet includes 56 supertankers. They account for 5% of the global shadow fleet. So because there are very few buyers, only countries like the CCP, India, and Turkey, the CCP is definitely the largest buyer. Since there are so few buyers, there are also very few transport teams. Who would dare to violate these sanctions? If you do, can you still do other business? So only shadow fleets can transport this oil. So with few buyers and few shipping fleets, and with the main player being the CCP, sellers have no choice but to let the CCP set the price. They can make demands, set conditions, and negotiate deep discounts, allowing the oil from these three countries to be continuously sold to the CCP. So, the US Congress conducted an investigation, and the results showed that by early 2026, at the beginning of this year, the CCP had already stockpiled about 1.2 billion barrels of sanctioned oil at prices far below the market rate. This amount is equivalent to 109 days of its normal seaborne oil consumption. This is what the CCP has stockpiled. Then, starting from 2025, the CCP imports oil by sea from these three countries every day. 1.4 million barrels per day from Russia, 850,000 barrels from Iran, and 420,000 barrels from Venezuela, totaling 2.6 million barrels. This accounts for 20% of China's daily oil imports. As a result, China can save a significant amount of money. In 2024 alone, these imports saved the CCP between $12 and $15 billion, and in 2025, the savings will be even greater. All right, so what does this mean? If you look at this situation, pay attention to what this article reveals: the Western sanctions on oil from Russia, Iran, and Venezuela. The original goal was to reduce the potential revenue these hostile governments could obtain. But what happened? Because the CCP ignores the sanctions and operates through shadow teams to circumvent them, cheap oil is instead funneled to the CCP, making China the beneficiary of these sanctions. Not only did it fail to impact those three countries, but it also allowed the CCP to profit handsomely, making a fortune. After Trump came to power and began cracking down hard on these shadow teams, the price of Russian oil dropped even further. As a result, the CCP's exclusive advantage became even more pronounced, enabling it to import on a large scale at even greater discounts. So, by importing Russian oil, yes, and similarly, after the US cracked down on the shadow teams, the price of Iranian crude oil also dropped, and the CCP took the opportunity to import large quantities as well. In other words, because of the CCP's presence, the sanctions not only failed, but actually ended up fattening the CCP. All right, but after the US took action to topple the regimes in Venezuela and Iran, the CCP was out of luck, because Venezuela turned to the US and now sells its oil on the open market. And as for Iranian oil, well, because of the war, of course, they're stuck and can't get it out, right? And because Trump lifted the oil sanctions on Russia, this resulted in a rise in Russian oil prices. Now, for more than 20% of its total oil imports, the CCP has no choice but to pay fair market prices. This is much higher than before. So this researcher Sadler said that all these actions took place right before the summit where Xi Jinping and Trump were about to meet. It was Trump sending a strong message to the CCP. Okay, so what about now? As a result, Iran is now taking action to choke off the Strait of Hormuz. Not only has it curbed global oil shipping traffic, but it has also disrupted the shadow fleet transporting oil to China. This has caused the value of the shadow fleet to drop significantly. So in this process, the two countries that have been hurt the most, one of them is China. In 2025, last year, the CCP bought as much as 80% of all the oil Iran exported, just from Iran alone. Last year, China imported an average of as many as 1.36 million barrels per day, which is extremely high. Okay, and as for Qatar, China imports natural gas from there. 14% of China's liquefied natural gas comes from Qatar. But what happened to Qatar? Last month, it was attacked by Iran. Its natural gas production plant was bombed by Iran. As a result, the CCP couldn't buy from them anymore and had to look elsewhere to purchase. However, everywhere else charges market prices, which are even higher. So Iran's strategy of blocking the Strait of Hormuz and attacking Qatar's natural gas facilities has ended up targeting Beijing, targeting the Chinese Communist Party. Okay, so as Iran's so-called ally, Iran originally expected to receive substantial support from the CCP as soon as the war began. However, at first, the CCP was just paying lip service. But now, the CCP has started demanding that Iran open up passage through the strait. In other words, China is not backing Iran. When Iran tried to use the strait to threaten the United States, the CCP said, no, no, no. Why? Simply put, the CCP can't take it anymore. So that's the situation. So, at present, Xi Jinping and as for Trump, there will be a summit held in mid-May. The Trump administration hopes to negotiate with Beijing at the summit for a truce in the trade war. At the same time, they will also use China's vulnerability in oil as leverage. That's the situation with all of this. The key is, how should we view all of this? This is the article that Trump retweeted. This is the article. Did everyone see it? Trump retweeted the article I just mentioned. Why did he retweet it? The point is to say, take a look. This makes sense, doesn't it? So, as I said, this is like Zhang performing the sword dance with his real target being Liu Bang, right? Trump's real target in this fight is Xi Jinping. Isn't that the case? So indeed, everything Trump is doing is aimed at the Chinese Communist Party. And after someone wrote it out like this, Trump is saying, you all should read this and see if that's what it means. So indeed, Trump is making a major move. Of course, Beijing isn't just sitting idly by either. Let me tell everyone, besides Iran opening up the strait for its own interests, according to the UK's Daily Telegraph, since the outbreak of the war, the Chinese Communist Party has already sent 5 ships loaded with solid missile fuel, specifically ammonium perchlorate and sodium perchlorate, to Iran. These 5 ships all belong to Iranian shipping companies under sanctions, and during their voyage, most of the time they turned off their trackers, at least 2 of them did. They reported the destination of their voyage, so essentially, this is also like a shadow team. The fuel they carried is enough for Iran to produce 785 ballistic missiles. So how does the Chinese Communist Party explain this? When reporters asked them, what did they say? They said that sodium perchlorate is not an export-controlled product, and that it's just normal commercial trade. So my comment for them is just 4 words. Who are you trying to fool? Isn't that right? And another thing, in late March, Iran once launched 101 ballistic missiles carrying out an intense attack on the USS Lincoln aircraft carrier in the Indian Ocean, right? I mentioned this to everyone yesterday, and all of them were shot down by the Hadopi system. And now, many major media outlets and large social media accounts are speculating that some or most of those missiles were actually China's CM-302 hypersonic anti-ship missiles, which have a range of 2,500 kilometers per hour. This was reportedly purchased in January of this year. This is publicly available information, though it's unclear when they were delivered. However, now multiple media sources are saying that they were transported overland to Iran via Pakistan. And this yesterday, I also mentioned to everyone that General Havlin said if this is true, then it constitutes an act of war. So does the US government know about this? As I said yesterday, of course they know. Cathy said, we know what the CCP has done. We know who did what. But we don't want to say anything, because if it's too serious, we'll deal with it, right? So what he means is, he said, we know it was the CCP who did it, but we don't want to complicate things. Besides, the stuff the CCP sent can't interfere with or disrupt our operations, so we don't need to say anything about it, but we'll remember it and settle the score later. That's the situation. So as you can see, behind the Iran war is really a power struggle between the CCP and Trump. This is truly the case. So in the end, we all know that after Trump resolves the Iran issue, the pressure will definitely shift to East Asia, targeting the CCP. There's really no doubt about it. That's how things stand. All right, now let's take a look at another move by President Trump. This morning, Trump posted a tweet. What did he say? Let me read it to you. The highly respected Prime Minister of Hungary, Orbán, is a truly strong and powerful leader. He has an outstanding record of governance that has stood the test of time. He tirelessly fights for his great country and people and loves them deeply. Just as I have done for the United States of America, he said. Orbán, that is Viktor, works hard to protect Hungary, develop the economy, promote employment, and safeguard trade. He promotes trade, stops illegal immigration, and ensures the rule of law and order. Under my administration, I hope the relationship between our two countries will reach new heights, demonstrating outstanding cooperation and achievements which are largely thanks to Prime Minister Orbán. I look forward to continuing to work with him and to further advancing our two countries. I was proud to endorse Viktor's re-election in 2022, and today I am honored to endorse him once again. Election day is Sunday, April 12th. On election day, people will go out and vote for Viktor Orbán. As you can see, this is a very clear show of support for Orbán. And as for Vance, that's even more obvious. Vance was entrusted by Trump to go directly to Hungary to stand with Orbán and participate in his rally. He participated in a mass rally. This is direct involvement, plain and simple. Yesterday, I listened to Vance's entire 37-minute speech. And well, Xintian has already translated the whole thing into Chinese, so if you're curious, you can check out Vance's speech on Xintian face-to-face. What Vance meant was direct involvement. He was basically telling the Hungarian people not to listen to Brussels. In other words, don't listen to the EU, listen to your own country. The main message was to defend Western civilization, to protect and safeguard your own country. This is really the US president and vice president very clearly intervening in another country's election. You might wonder whether this makes sense or not, whether it's appropriate or not. Of course, this absolutely breaks with previous international norms. There's no doubt about it. But when I watch their speeches, when I see Trump posting these tweets, doesn't it feel like Trump is helping a governor campaign? Isn't that the case? It really is. That's why Trump doesn't hesitate at all, because Western society is facing this exact problem right now. Each country is like a state, and the whole world is like the United States. This is an internal civil war within the Western world. Of course, this civil war isn't one with gunfire. It's a war of ideologies. So that's the situation now. Why are Trump and Vance and the EU putting so much effort into this? Because the European Union has 27 member states, and it has a particular characteristic. What is that characteristic? For all major decisions, diplomacy, tariffs, funding, aid, and so on, there is a one-vote veto system. All 27 countries must agree for anything to pass. That's the first point. Now, the second point. The EU only has rules for admitting new members, but no rules for kicking anyone out. So you can join, but you can't be kicked out. That's the second point. So if Trump manages to turn just one country against the EU from within, or if he manages to protect a country, to protect Orbán, to protect Hungary, then the EU is basically paralyzed when it comes to major issues. I'm being very clear and direct here. The EU can't kick out a country just because it doesn't listen, right? But what the EU can do is cut off funding. What does cutting off funding achieve? Because, when the EU was established, there was this idea that the EU should help level things out to support poorer countries. If your country is poor, you can get money from the richer countries. So how much money do you get each year? For Hungary, it still falls below the average line, so it's considered a poor country and can receive billions of dollars every year. So that's why funding can be cut off. This is also why, even though Hungary doesn't like the way the EU does things, it doesn't want to leave because it can get money from the EU. Okay, so can the EU say, you're too disobedient, you keep blocking us, so we're going to kick you out? It is possible, but it requires the agreement of all the other countries, and that leads to a problem. Hungary and Poland, both in Eastern Europe, are quite united, right? They both follow what's called conservative nationalism, conservatism plus nationalism, meaning traditional values and traditional nationalism. So, if you want to kick Hungary out, Poland will veto it. If you want to kick Poland out, Hungary will veto it. They cover for each other. They veto each other, so decisions about cutting off funding can't be made at all. This deadlock leads to some very interesting outcomes. It ends up being completely stuck, so that's the situation. In my view, what Trump and Vance mean is that as long as you can win over just one EU country, the EU as a whole becomes paralyzed. But in the future, I think Europe will actually become divided internally. I'm not saying this division is necessarily a bad thing. What I'm saying is that, just like in the rest of the Western world, Europe is experiencing an ideological struggle within itself. That's why there's a saying, those whose principles differ cannot work together. So it's impossible for the current state of the EU to last long. It will inevitably change. The election on April 12th is a major decision. If Hungary chooses to let Orbán stay in power, well, Orbán has been in office since 2010, so he's been governing for 16 years now. He's a perennial prime minister. His ideology is that of a conservative, a Western conservative, and on top of that, nationalism. Trump really approves of this approach. Some viewers and listeners say that Orbán is very pro-Russia, pro-Putin, and even pro-CCP. Is that really the case? Yes and no. Why? The main reason he is pro-Russia is actually quite specific. Hungary needs Russian natural gas. Because it doesn't have a seaport, it can't import natural gas by sea, can't rely on ships. His options are very limited, so economically he is highly dependent on Russian natural gas. That's why he doesn't want to fall out with Putin. It's as simple as that. For him, the relationship with Russia is more about pragmatic, interest-based diplomacy. However, it doesn't mean he agrees with Putin's aggression. That's not the case at all. As for the Chinese Communist Party, he supports China's Belt and Road Initiative also because there are profits to be made. If the Belt and Road comes to my country and I can make money from it, I'm willing to go along with it. But if there are no benefits, I believe Orbán